Hello and welcome to Quiz Time. I'm Jess and today I have 100 questions on the 1920s. So, are you ready? Let's go. Which scientist discovered in the 1920s that space-time coordinates and causality are complementary? Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg or Niels Bohr? Niels Bohr. When did Heisenberg first write about quantum mechanics? 1921, 1925 or 1927? 1925. Who formulated a fully relativistic quantum theory in 1928? Henrik Lorentz, Albert Einstein or Paul Dirac? Paul Dirac. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in which hospital? St Mary's Hospital, Johns Hopkins Hospital or St Thomas Hospital? St Mary's Hospital. What amendment was ratified in 1920 and granted American women the right to vote? It was the 19th Amendment. Which 1920s subculture exemplified women's liberation, challenging traditional norms and values? Suffragette movement, flapper culture, or temperance society? It was the flapper culture. What international organisation promoting world peace was founded in January 1920? United Nations, League of Nations, or European Union? League of Nations. What happened in 1929 after the single-day trade of 16 million shares on the New York Stock Exchange? Economic boom, gold standard adoption, or Wall Street crash? Wall Street crash. Which treaty signed in 1925 sought to guarantee peace in Western Europe? Treaty of Versailles, Locarno Treaties, or Kellogg-Briand Pact? Locarno Treaties. What was the 1928 agreement that renounced war as a means of settling international disputes? Treaty of Versailles, Locarno Treaties, or Kellogg-Briand Pact? Kellogg-Briand Pact. What diplomatic assembly took place in Washington between 1921 and 1922 to discuss naval restrictions and the situation in East Asia? Washington Naval Conference. What item faced prohibition from sale when the Volstead Act took effect in 1920? Tobacco products, alcoholic beverages, or coffee beans? Alcoholic beverages. What 1922 treaty post-World War I laid the groundwork for naval disarmament and determined an arms race? 4-Power Treaty, 5-Power Treaty, or 9-Power Treaty? 5-Power Treaty. Which 1921 treaty replaced the Anglo-Japanese Treaty of 1902? 4-Power Treaty, 5-Power Treaty, or 9-Power Treaty? 4-Power Treaty. What event shocked the world on February the 14th, 1929, involving gang violence in Chicago? St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Which Chicago outfit boss retired in 1925 for being seriously wounded after an assassination attempt? Al Capone, Johnny Torrio, or Bugs Moran? Johnny Torrio. The Immigration Act of 1924 is also referred to as what? National Origins Act, Quato Act, or Ellis Island Restriction Act? National Origins Act. What conference held in 1927 failed due to irreconcilable disagreements among the participating parties? Geneva Naval Conference, Locarno Conference, or World Disarmament Conference? Geneva Naval Conference. What classic fashion brand started in Florence in 1921? Chanel, Gucci, or Louis Vuitton? Gucci. How much did a ticket for a double feature and a live show cost during the 1920s in America? 15 cents, 25 cents, or 35 cents? 25 cents. What type of film was predominant in the 1920s? Silent film, documentary, or experimental film? Silent film. Which actor starred in the 1925 silent film The Gold Rush? Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, or Charlie Chaplin? Charlie Chaplin. What technology introduced after World War I became a common feature in American homes during the 1920s? Refrigerator, radio, or microwave oven? The radio. The transition from silent films to sound films in 1927 marked the advent of what cinematic era? Talkies era. Who was the first woman to successfully swim the English Channel in 1926? Gertrude Ederle. Who won the unbroken streak in the men's singles at the US Open Tennis Championships from 1920 to 1925? Bill Tilden, René Lacoste, or William Johnson? Bill Tilden. What was the name of the African-American boy whose arrest triggered the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre? Michael Johnson, Emmett Till, or Dick Rowland? Dick Rowland. What company created gummy beans in 1922? Or gummy bears, sorry. Haribo, Mars Inc. or Nestle? Haribo, yeah, they've been around since 1922. What year was the first live sporting event broadcasted over the radio? 1920, 1921 or 1922? (1921). Who was Jack Dempsey's opponent in his 1921 boxing match? Gene Tunney, Tommy Gibbons, or Georges Carpentier? Georges Carpentier. What 1920s Broadway musical popularised the Charleston? Chicago, Cabaret, or running wild? Running wild. What structure, built in 1923 as a real estate advertisement, became famous as a tourist attraction? Eiffel Tower, Hollywood sign, or Sydney Opera House? Hollywood sign. What year was the iconic Grauman's Chinese Theatre opened? 1925, 1926, or 1927? 1927. Who produced the 1927 film The King of Kings? Cecil DeMille, Charlie Chaplin, or Alfred Hitchcock? Cecil DeMille. Throughout the Prohibition era, the government sanctioned the use of alcohol strictly for therapeutic applications. True or false? It's true. Which American brand introduced a flavoured drink mix in 1927? Coca-Cola, Kool-Aid, or Pepsi-Cola? Kool-Aid. Who initiated the craze of pole sitting in the 1920s? Charles Lindbergh, Avon Foreman, or Alvin Kelly? Alvin Kelly. What art style became dominant in the US during the 1920s? Cubism, Art Deco, or Surrealism? Art Deco. Who was the President of the United States during most of the 1920s? Franklin Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, or Calvin Coolidge? Calvin Coolidge. What political ideology gained prominence in Italy during the 1920s? Communism, fascism, or socialism? Fascism. What year did KDKA start its regular broadcast as a commercial radio station? 1920, 1921, or 1922? 1920. What was the first national network formed by Radio Corporation of America in 1926? NBC, CBS, or ABC? NBC. What book did A.A. Milne publish in 1926? Winnie the Pooh, The House of Pooh Corner, or Now We Are Six? Winnie the Pooh. In what year was the first issue of Reader's Digest published? 1921, 1927, or 1923? 1922. How many hours did it take for Charles Lindbergh to cross the Atlantic Ocean in 1927? Around 20 hours, around 30 hours, or around 40 hours? Around 30 hours. What brand advertised their soap in the Ladies' Home Journal in 1922? Ivory, Pears, or Palm Olive? palm olive. What pandemic ended in April 1920? Spanish flu, swine flu, or Asian flu? Spanish flu. Who was the editor of the first issue of Time magazine, published in 1923? Henry Luce, Britton Haddon, or Walter Winchell? Britton Haddon. What army invaded Georgia in February 1921? German Army, Ottoman Army, or Red Army? Red Army. Which Mexican leader, a key figure in the Mexican Revolution, was assassinated in 1923? Pancho Villa, Emilio Zapata, or Alvaro Obregón? Pancho Villa. Halfway there, how are you doing? Who was the first Soviet head of the state whose term ended with his death in 1924? Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, or Leon Trotsky? Vladimir Lenin. Who took over Pope Benedict after he died in 1922? Pope Pius, Pope John, or Pope Paul? It was Pope Pius. Whose tomb did Howard Carter discover in 1922? Tutankhamun, Ramesses II, or Cleopatra? Tutankhamun. Who founded London's first birth control clinic on March the 17th, 1921? Marie Stopes, Margaret Sanger, or Florence Nightingale? Marie Stopes. What crime was Adolf Hitler convicted of that resulted in his imprisonment in 1924? Fraud, theft, or treason? It was treason. What book, translated as My Struggle, did Hitler write during his imprisonment? Mein Kampf, Mein Schlacht, or Mein Konflikt? Mein Kampf. What was the name of the failed coup led by Adolf Hitler in 1923? Night of the Lion Knives, Beer Hall Putsch, or Reichstag Fire? Beer Hall Putsch. Who was the conductor in Rhapsody in Blue when it premiered in 1924? Leonard Bernstein, George Gershwin, or Paul Whiteman? Paul Whiteman. Where was Maurice Ravel's Bolero first played? When? November 1925, November 1927, or November 1928? November 1928. Which Duke of York got married in 1923? Prince Albert, Prince George, or Prince Edward? Prince Albert. What popular beverage did Charles Leeper Grigg invent in 1929? Cola, root beer, or 7-Up? 7-Up. Which popular character did Elise Chrysler Cigar introduce in 1929 through the Thimble Theatre? Popeye, Betty Boo, or Felix the Cat? It was Popeye. Who introduced the 40-hour work week in 1926? Henry Ford, Robert Owen, or Francis Perkins? Henry Ford. Who was the longest reigning monarch in Japan's history, crowned as Emperor of Japan in 1926? Meiji, Akihito, or Hirohito? Hirohito. Which tower of the Wrigley Building reached its completion in 1924? North Tower, South Tower, or Clock Tower? North Tower. Who made the first ever live radio broadcast of a hockey match in 1923? Pete Parker, Norman Albert, or Foster Hewitt? Norman Albert. Which one did not receive the Joint Nobel Award in Physiology and Medicine in 1923? Frederick Banting, John McLeod, or Otto Warburg? Otto Warburg. Which 1929 legal case established women eligible to the Senate? Pensions case, Citizens Equality Act, or Smith v Parliament? Persons case. Which 1920s slang means nonsense? Baloney, egg, or cash? It's baloney. Which 1920s slang simply means man? Baloney, egg, or cash? Egg. In 1922, a year following the signing of a treaty, which country came into existence? Ireland, Czechoslovakia, or Saudi Arabia? Ireland. What treaty was signed in 1921 that led to the existence of the Irish Free State? Versailles Treaty, Treaty of Ireland, or Anglo-Irish Treaty? Anglo-Irish Treaty. Which silent film released in 1920 is known for showing twisted and bizarre images? The Galen, Intolerance, or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari? The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Who directed the 1927 semi-talkie musical film The Jazz Singer? Charlie Chaplin, Alfred Hitchcock, or Alan Crosland? Alan Crosland. Which director is known for his expressionist vampire film Nosferatu in 1922? Fritz Lang, F.W. Murnau, or Cecil B. DeMille? F.W. Murnau. Which actress was known as It Girl and symbolised the flapper era in silent films? Clara Bow, Greta Garbo, or Mary Pickford? Clara Bow, or Bow. What served as the primary musical accompaniment for silent films during the 1920s? live orchestras, synthesized music, or recorded soundtracks. Live orchestras. Which 1925 film is a landmark in the history of cinema for its revolutionary editing techniques? Metropolis, Battleship Potemkin, or The General? Battleship Potemkin. What caused Harry Houdini's death in 1926? Failed stunt, accidental poisoning, or ruptured appendix? It was a ruptured appendix. Which 1927 film won the first Academy Award for Best Picture? Wings, Gone with the Wind, or Casablanca? Wings. Which decorated war hero became the 8th Prime Minister of Australia in 1923? Stanley Melbourne Bruce. Following Norman Albert's live broadcast on February the 8th, 1923, who made the first complete game broadcast on March the 14th, 1923? Pete Parker. Who was the first ever cover of Time magazine? Albert Einstein, Charles Lindbergh, or Joseph Cannon? Joseph Cannon. What was the secret establishment that operated illegally during the Prohibition era in the US? Speakeasy, covert pub, or undercover lounge? Speakeasy. Who smuggled alcoholic beverages to America during the Prohibition? Rum runners, whiskey walkers, or moonshiners? Rum runners. The 1920 presidential election was the first in the United States where women could vote. True or false? True. The Palm Sunday tornado outbreak of 1920 swept through the east and south states of the USA. True or false? It's false. It was Midwest and South. What state had the highest population rate according to the 1920 US Census data? New York, Illinois, or Michigan? It's New York. What state had the second highest population rate according to the 1920 US Census data? New York, Illinois, or Michigan? Illinois. At least how many tornadoes were there during the Palm Sunday tornado outbreak in 1920? 19, 28, or 37? 37 tornadoes. Which actress did Douglas Fairbanks marry in 1920? Mary Pickford, Gloria Swanson, or Clara Bow? Or both? Mary Pickford. On what grounds did Mary Pickford dissolve her first marriage in the same year she was set to wed again? Infidelity, incompatibility, or desertion? Desertion. What year did the AFBF draft their group statement? 1920, 1922 or 1924? (1920). Which singer had his final public performance at the Metropolitan Opera in 1920 as Eleanor in La Juive? Enrico Caruso, Fedor Chapelin or Enrico Tassili? Enrico Caruso. What was the cause of death for the American baseball player Ray Chapman in 1920? Choked on water, trench foot, or hit by a pitch? Hit by a pitch. Which team won the 1920 Baseball World Series? New York Yankees, Cleveland Indians, or Chicago White Sox? Cleveland Indians. What did Walther Nernst formulate that made him win the 1920 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, received in 1921? Quantum mechanics, third law of thermodynamics, or theory of relativity? Third law of thermodynamics. Which 1920s film portrays a society lady entranced by an unskilled hypnotist? Anita, Lola, or Nora? It's Anita. What was meant by bathtub gin? Poor quality alcohol, high quality alcohol, or beach feels alcohol? Poor quality alcohol. And your last one, in which country was the Mary Pickford cocktail named after an actress created in the 1920s? United States, Canada, or Cuba? It's Cuba. So, how did you do on the 1920s? Drop your score in the comments below, and of course like and subscribe so you get notified every time we post a new quiz. And please join us next time on Quiz Time.